If you love historical sites, you'll love the place we're visiting today. Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Today we're in Williamsburg, Virginia. It's our first time here. We're going to see a lot of historic sites. We're going to take you guys along with us. You first go to Williamsburg Visitor Center. They give you a map, you get on a bus, and they take you to historic Williamsburg. There are several bus stops throughout Williamsburg that you could choose as your location to be dropped off. We chose our first stop to be the Governor's Palace. The Governor's Palace was home to 7 royal governors and the first 2 elected governors in Virginia. It was built to impress visitors with a display of authority and wealth, and it does just that.
Welcome all, my name is Sarah. I'm going to be taking you through our palace today, our Governor's Palace. Now, this building is not an original building, this is a reconstruction. The original Governor's Palace just started construction in 1705, the same year that the Capitol was finished. And that will remain here until 1781, when it burns down, literally to the ground. When Rockefeller Jr. comes here, he decides to reinvest in Williamsburg. He sees its importance to history, to the founding of the United States, and he will start construction on 3 separate buildings: the Capitol, the Palace, and the Raleigh. Charge of kind of running the inner workings of the site. That's his area, that's his domain. Right, and then to my left, we're gonna have the parlor. Great place for cards, for smaller gatherings. It's also sometimes used as an office space. Captain Coy, the personal secretary to Governor Dunmore, will actually take up residence in here and issue out official licenses such as marriage or land grants.
The amount of weapons that were on the walls in this front room was quite impressive. It was meant to show strength and also to intimidate the colonist. We were also told that if they needed them, the weapons were taken down and used in times of battle. We were then taken from the front 3 rooms to the upstairs.
For those lessons, right? In this room, we also see a red silk, right? That's all being imported. We also look at the gold. That's actually paper mache painted in gold trim. Right? So this room shows the power and the wealth in a different way than that front hall.
When going through the bedrooms upstairs, we asked about the canopies above the beds and all the material around the beds, and they said these were practical. In the winter, they would pull those closed to save the body heat because they didn't stoke up the fire during the night. Because their only source of heat in the bedrooms was a fireplace. Then we headed back downstairs to the party room.
You notice that wall-to-wall carpet. Have you guys been in any places that have wall-to-wall carpet? It's going to be heated by essentially a furnace operated once again kind of by coal. These parties will go into the early hours of the next morning.
This room showed the grandeur and the opulence of royal authority in Virginia, from the woodwork to the wall-to-wall carpeting to the furnace. It was things that the ordinary citizen did not see. There is so much to see, you don't really know where to look first. And then we walk into the grand dining room.
And we do declare our independence. And guess who moves in one of the very next days? Patrick Henry, our first non-royal governor. And our newly formed government is we immediately get to work on creating a Virginia known as the Declaration of Rights. And I encourage you guys to go to the Capitol to hear more about those rights that are now going to be protected under that document.
I heard our guide tell another person in our group that there is a chair inside the palace where Patrick Henry supposedly died in that chair. At least that's the speculation. We then go outside of the palace and walk along the palace grounds and in the gardens. The palace is surrounded by a brick wall and has many outbuildings. I even went exploring down in the cellar underneath the palace. I'm in the cellar, and the cellar of the palace is absolutely huge. Unbelievable. It's a whole different place. Wow. It just goes on and on and on. It was like a whole different world down in that cellar. It was like a maze. You could literally get lost. Among the outbuildings was a larder, which was used for food storage. They also had a salt room, and they had a kitchen. They had a scullery, among many other buildings.
That hopefully, if this brew is successful, we do have a partnership with Aleworks, one of our breweries in town, who in a modern, sterile, tax-paying environment, very much not like us out here in the scullery today, they will actually take our 18th century recipe, and under the sort of guidance of our master of the shop, who is also our brewer here, they will actually be able to brew this 18th century variety of pale ale for public consumption. So hopefully it'll be one of the ones that you guys will also be able to get here at Colonial Williamsburg.
It was so interesting to watch them make this pale ale using a recipe from the 17th century. Then we made our way around to the palace gardens where they grew their vegetables for the palace. And this building was used as the kitchen. You can actually take a tour of Williamsburg with a horse-drawn carriage. As you walk around Williamsburg, if they have their flag out front, that means that building is open. Not every building is open every day in Williamsburg.
You could get how it would have looked. And this building is actually an original building.
So what kind of things would have been actually bought here or sold here?
General store. Yeah, it would have been kitchenware, utensils, food, soap, buckets, just anything you needed for your life.
There are 89 original buildings in Williamsburg, and this store was one of those original 89 buildings. There were some of those historic homes right there in Williamsburg that were private residences. This was very surprising to us. Do we look official or what? We actually spent 2 full days in Williamsburg and never got to see everything. As we visited the silversmith shop, it was explained to us that the colonists would bring in their silver and then they would make articles for them at the silversmith shop. right.
Yeah.
See that little bitty spoon on top of that thing?
If you're in Virginia in the 1700s, you're going to have ready access to that.
Is that tobacco?
It is. That will numb your teeth. And if for some reason it doesn't work, you can come get these, which are not growing in Virginia or the other colonies, cloves.
I've heard of that remedy before.
There are dentists, some oral surgeons that still use it today. They do surgery procedures to reduce inflammation and the risk of infection.
Yeah.
A few other things you can do for your toothache. I give you an opium pill. And they said hold it between the two that hurts and the one above or below it. And you can put ether on top of your teeth to numb it.
This tooth pulling device looked medieval. And so did some of the other doctoring tools they had there. Then we made our way to the Capitol building. This was the seat of colonial Virginia's government for 75 years. It was here, in this place, where Patrick Henry denounced the Stamp Act in 1776. And we all know what he said: give me liberty or give me death. The colonists by this time were tired of taxation without representation. England just kept taxing, and it was the Stamp Act that was the straw that broke the camel's back for the colonists. George Washington, George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, and others played parts in the legislative maneuvering that ended in revolution. This building was absolutely magnificent, and it was another guided tour. This lady gave us all kinds of history that happened here at the Capitol. The Presbyterians actually had to get permission to worship here because everyone was required to attend the state church. Charlton's Coffee House is where Williamsburg citizens and visitors met to share news, transact business, and debate politics. And the wallpaper and carpet is enough to make you nauseous. It's very busy indeed. This was another guided tour, and it was very fashionable back then to be part of a coffee house. Then we got to go down in the basement where we got to choose if we wanted to try coffee or their melted chocolate. You know what I chose. Hot melted chocolate at the coffee house. It's so good. There were restaurants in historic Williamsburg where you could sit down and have a meal, although most required reservations.
It goes, what am I going to use on my bed?
Right.
Obviously, I'm going to use a little blanket.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't have to be particularly thick, but for a soldier, I want it to be a nice fulled or finished wool, because I want it to be waterproof to some degree. I want it to be hydrophobic. I want water to beat on the surface of it. A fair amount of soldiers are using these blankets as clothing. Lafayette actually tells all his men orders all his men, and a bunch of the other armies do it too as well, to add buttons and ties on the front of their blankets so that they can wear it as a cloak.
Oh.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon thing to do, to just wear your blanket. Well, if it's not properly finished, then I would just be wearing a heavy thing that wouldn't be particularly warm because the wind would go through through it. If it's properly finished, then the wind is not going to go through it and water is going to beat on the surface of it. So I'm going to stay nice and cozy when I'm wearing my blanket, which is very important. But by and large, you have soldiers with muskets. The different armies have different forms of muskets. So like the French army has the French Charleville. It's still a musket, it's just the French version of the musket, as opposed to this one's the shortline pattern service musket, so it's the British version of the musket. If you're American, you have the Charleville, which is the French version of the musket.
So while we were there, the guardhouse was closed. Evidently, during renovations, they found some skeletons, so archaeologists were working there.
So this one's pretty simple. It's all linen coming down from the back here, and it's in a pattern called straight draw. So we're using it just to do plainly, just over one, under one, over one, under one. It's as simple as it gets. So it took us about 6.5 hours to thread it because there are 648 yarns there that we had to thread through these little eyelets individually.
Then we come to the old church, which was another original building on the grounds. We were able to walk around and see the old cemetery and even able to go inside. This was a church that was ran by the state, so the colonists were obligated to go to this church, and it was so neat knowing that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson once attended here. If walls could talk, oh, the history that is here within these walls. And they still hold services here.
It's never been reconstructed. We have 89 originals, and this is one of the oldest. So by the time Thomas Jefferson and George Washington get here as late teenagers and early 20s, it's already old.
Wow, so this was built when, did you
It was
say?
finished by 1715. But see, they're living here. This is palisaded, and people are living here by 1633. They get to Jamestown in 1607, and they very quickly start going up and down the rivers and the streams to see what kind of place they've discovered. And by 1633, they have palisaded this place and have men here building the palisade and have a fortification. By the 1660s, there's what's termed an old church. There's a couple of stores, there's a couple of taverns, there's a brick oven, and they've decided they're going to make it a new town, a new settlement. And by 1693, the college is chartered. By 1699, they moved the capital in here. And by that point, they realized now they have to have a big church because there's going to be a lot of people coming here. And the little church out in the yard was like 28 by 50, a typical small rectangle. And it just wasn't nearly big enough. So they began to tax the people, cook the bricks, and make the plans to build this one. And it took 5 years to build.
Wow.
And they made it, they thought, big enough for the government and the people. Well, right away they realized it wasn't big enough. But they have a big pew for the governor and his council, and they have a chair like a throne for the governor, and then they have a big pew for the rector. And the point here is to show the unity of church and state. And then all the men of the town on this side, all the women of the town on that side, all the government across the front. So if you look up at the ceiling, that puts the American government in arms across. And when you understand the metaphor of the cross, the upright is God's will for man, and the crossbar where Christ put his arms out to save the world. The role of government is to save the people. And that's a biblical precept.
Colonial Williamsburg is the world's largest outdoor museum. There is so many incredible things to see here. If you've never been, we highly recommend it. There are live demonstrations all throughout the day at various places.
We can build something like this in about 10 hours, where something like this fireplace surround, we're estimating that maybe took about 150 hours.
house was privately owned and it sat right in the middle of historic Williamsburg. On the west side of Williamsburg is Merchant Square, which is filled with shops and eateries. Join us next week for part 2 of Williamsburg. If you would like to see more videos of the historic triangle, click the playlist that just popped up on your screen.